Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Insight250 Spotlight series, where we talk to leaders and innovators around the globe to understand the stories and the people behind the insights. Now, I'm Crispin Beale, CEO of Insight250, and I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be joined today by Natasha Hritzug, who is the VP for Global Consumer Insight at Warner Brothers Discovery. So thank you for joining us, Natasha.
My pleasure.
Now, I'm sure the first thing viewers will want to know is, how did you get into insights?
It's a long story, so I'm going to give you the very condensed version. I mean, I'll start off by saying I had no idea this profession even existed, and I feel like that has been the plight of Insights for so long that it's not a degree course. It's not something you go into a university syllabus and see an entire module devoted to consumer insights. It's usually buried in part of a psychology course, or if you're doing statistics, part of an econometrics course. So I feel like we're still a bit recessive from a curriculum perspective. So I actually was going down an academic path, and I was using all the methodologies we use, but focused more on the political arena. So I was doing a lot of survey research, trying to understand why people are politically active, since I always thought it was sort of irrational to be politically active, since, in theory, one person can't impact, can't impact change. So I was curious what drove people to become active in a political environment. And then I got through my degree, and as luck would have it, I decided I didn't want to go into academia, and took initially some interviews with the broadcasters who had polling units, because that felt like a reasonable path and a connection point. Those turned out to be like heavy math jobs. And so I kind of skipped out of that world and started work for a market research agency called Worthland Worldwide. And that was purely because somebody who was running one of the polling groups at ABC, his wife worked for this company. He's like, well, why don't you talk to her and see if you have any interest in what she does? I'm like, okay. I mean, again, when I heard agency, I guess I was thinking probably ad agency, or I truly didn't really know what this group did. And after about half an hour, I thought, oh my God, this is a profession? You mean they take all these, methods that I use on a regular basis, but you're working with Coke and you're working with, Pfizer and Chevrolet to understand brands and develop products. It was like finding a trunk filled with gold. I was sort of startled. Now, the sad bit is I actually didn't get the job initially, because they said, oh, we're a bit worried since you're coming down the academic path. Do you have commercial acumen? And I was thinking, well, how do I know if I've never had a chance to work in a commercial environment? So I actually went to another agency for a year. They came back to me and said, we keep sort of like dating, we keep thinking about you and your interview and the passion you had. And, would you be willing to come back and interview with us? And I there had been good chemistry, again, the dating analogy, but, it is kind of the way the job search works. And I ended up moving to that firm, working at Worthland for 5 years. And that really launched my career, because, we were working with almost every major vertical: FinServ, CPG, pharmaceuticals, lobbyists. I mean, it was such a great exposure to so many different industries. And then, of course, on the agency side, you're doing brand work, you're doing product innovation, you're doing ad testing. So it gave me incredible exposure to the entire research toolkit. So it was such a great way to start my career. But then I kind of realized after 5 years that it didn't always feel gratifying to do the work, but not see it through to fruition. So I made the decision at that juncture to move to the client side, which was when I kind of launched into this path, which was initially with General Mills. I worked there for 5 years and ran the insights and category management, or shopper insights team for General Mills UK, moved to Microsoft, and then what was Turner, then Warner Media, now Warner Brothers Discovery, so then pivoted into entertainment. So none of this was planned. It was just sort of, wherever the path kind of led me, I went. So I guess, in retrospect, I loved the start that I got because it was broad exposure and I learned to work with clients. I learned on the ground. That was my university for consumer insights. And then, I think once I moved to General Mills, getting that client side experience where you're at the table with the C suite, where you're working with them to implement what you've learned from research, and helping that drive sales strategy and marketing strategy and product development strategy and being responsible for the end-to-end product lifecycle from a research perspective was another great training ground. So I feel fortunate for that trajectory. And again, it wasn't planned. It was just kind of the opportunities that arose and that I leapt on at these different kind of apertures down my career path.
Oh, so well, you've certainly worked for some amazing brands and had some great experience there. And now, of course, in media and entertainment, you're in one of the fastest moving sectors there is. So how do you see sort of insights evolving in this space, in media and entertainment?
I mean, we're at an interesting juncture, I think, in entertainment and media because, historically this was a B2B business. You were basically selling content via cable packages to cable companies and then selling audience to advertisers and media companies, media agencies. And once the cable world started to change and TV as a sort of linear proposition, it started to diminish. And, we're kind of looking at a 4 to 5 year trajectory with the wind down of cable TV, which is sort of stunning. But look, I mean, every business has been impacted by digital, and entertainment's, not unique in that way. But when the business realized about 4 years ago, we need to go direct to consumer. And, we started to build a streaming platform. And the business kind of realized, wow, we need to start flexing that consumer muscle. We've been packaging research as a sales tool, but this is a very different discipline. It's about understanding the connection emotionally, rationally, the needs that you're addressing or not addressing, with your brands and your products that consumers directly buy into or subscribe to or don't. So it kind of brought to the fore really all of that CPG muscle that I hadn't flexed in a long time, because at the end of the day you're doing a very similar set of work. What's our brand? Why does it matter? How do we translate that into marketing messages? How does that become the basis for an advertising or communication campaign? How do we reach our consumers with this campaign? Where are they? Where do we need to be? And then how do we keep evolving and improving the product so that consumers continuously have a seamless and positive experience? And you just substitute streaming or direct to consumer for, Coke, a can of Coke, or a taco kit, or a tub of ice cream. It's all very much the same body of research, just applied differently. So I would say that that's been the sea change, going from using research as a selling tool to using research as a vehicle for actually deep understanding of consumers.
Yeah, I think that deep understanding is becoming more and more critical all the
Mm-hmm.
time. So I guess, thinking about our viewers, what would your top tip be to them to help them to be innovators and leaders in our profession? What's your top tip?
I mean, I probably have two. I think, for our profession, certainly you have to have math skills, you have to be technically strong, but I think the soft skills get overlooked a fair amount or get sort of shoved into the background or are more sort of implicit. But I think it's absolutely critical to continuously be curious, to never ever feel like you've got the answer, that you understand the consumer, that you understand the role of your brand or product in consumers' lives. Things change rapidly. Consumers, there's a lot of continuity, but I think complacency or assuming you have all the answers is terrible for a researcher, because if you're not constantly trying to deepen your understanding, understand why, kind of unpick context, and constantly trying to get to the bottom of what's happening and surfacing new questions and having that exploratory mindset, I think it narrows our understanding, and it doesn't really cultivate what we need, which is that continuous 360 view of our consumers. So I think that inherent curiosity, my daughter's always saying, why are you so nosy? Why do you care? I mean, I guess you could call it nosy, but it's the desire to just understand people and like an ongoing thirst for that knowledge about why people do what they do, not just being satisfied with what they do, but trying to get at all the different dimensions that drive human behavior. So I think that's a huge piece. I think the other piece, certainly from a leadership perspective, is, no matter how senior you are, there's always a ton to learn. And if you don't allow your thinking to be challenged, to invite your team and your colleagues to press your thinking in new directions, even if it's just a questionnaire. Is this the best way to ask the question? Just because it's always been done this way, does that mean it's right? I think everything is evolving from a methodological perspective, from a technology perspective. There always seems to be new and better ways of doing things. And I don't think any of us have mastered the art of perfection. There's always room to improve and there's always room to grow intellectually. So I would say, challenge can be uncomfortable, but if we don't challenge ourselves to think differently and absorb new information, I think it does a disservice, certainly, to ourselves and our intellectual growth, but it also has an impact, I think, on our ability to do our job well in this dynamic environment.
Curiosity and learning. I think that is so true and so key. And jumping back to media for a moment, because it really is a hot area that lots of people are talking about. I mean, with it being so dynamic in nature, the sort of entertainment industry, can you talk a bit about the importance of understanding audience trends, behaviors, and preferences, and perhaps give us an example or two?
Well, I mean, a living example, and this is something that is a huge area of focus for my team right now, is understanding where consumers are heading in terms of their relationship with content. I mean, if you think about the legacy media business, it's been pretty much the same since, the advent of movies in the 20s. You had movies, and then, in the kind of late 40s, I guess early 50s, you had TV sort of emerged, and you were watching movies at a theater. You're watching this kind of episodic content on a television. Sometimes movies would show up on that box as well. And then suddenly digital hits. And not only are people watching content on a ton of different platforms, but this kind of conventional content, the 30-minute episode, TV episode, and the 1.5 hour to 2.5 hour to 3 hour movie are no longer the dominant forms of content that Gen Z are watching. They're still watching TV and they're still watching movies, but it's a thinner slice of their broader consumption pie, is what we call it. They're watching a lot of short form. And I think it's really easy to write that off and just say, oh, well, they're young and, social media is the thing when you're, 18, 19, 20. And, once they have kids, they're going to go back to watching TV. And we've been doing a ton of research in this area, and we're finding out that actually that's not the case. The habits, and this is very true for, I think a lot of categories, certainly people change over time, but a lot of those ingrained habits are formulated at a young age. And if you've grown up watching short form as a core part of your content consumption mix, you're not going to suddenly stop watching it magically at 26. It's still going to be something that you've, in the way that even as adults who didn't grow up with social, I think a lot of people spend more time than they did 5 years ago looking at their social feeds, Instagram, Facebook. So, the fact is that these new content formats have really fundamentally changed the way people are viewing. And to just say, okay, well, this is a behavior, and I guess, are we in it? Are we not in it? Like, that's one path. But, what we're saying is, well, we need to kind of break this into two chunks. Why are Gen Z watching our kind of content, the longer form content? What are the needs that content addresses? And do we have the right mix? Like if the need is, say, being part of the kind of broader cultural conversation, and there are certain shows that satisfy that need, do we have enough of those? It's enough, if we just said, well, sometimes they watch, sometimes they don't, that doesn't really give us the path to developing a strategy to optimize the business today. But if we start to understand, oh, well, this is why they watch, and these are the shows that satisfy that need, do we have enough of them? Then it starts to give us a path forward. And similarly, if we understand that short form content addresses a really critical need that we're not currently addressing, and there's a way that we can leverage our IP to satisfy that need, but in a way that's unique to our business and our assets, then that again gives us a whole different path forward that maybe starts to future-proof the business. And I think a lot of the research has kind of begun and ended with what people are doing in this consumption wheel. But if you look at a consumption wheel and you're saying, well, they're really not watching a lot of us, and that's the end of the story, then you're stuck. Like, what's the path forward? Do you just, put out your close sign and walk away? You need to find a path forward. And if you don't understand what is driving this shift in behavior and what these different content types are doing for people within the course of their lives, you don't really understand what you can leverage, what you should leave alone, what you should pursue, what you could adapt for your environment with the assets that your company has. So we have a needs model that is something we've been using for years, and it's really becoming a critical overlay to help us understand what's happening with Gen Z and what we do about it as a business.
Natasha, that is all absolutely fascinating to hear how you are really using insights to innovate and lead Warner Brothers Discovery. And I'm sure you and I could talk about this subject for hours. And indeed, for all the viewers who actually think we want more of this, well, you can get more of Natasha straight away. You can read the whole article that Natasha did on the impact of insights on entertainment at Insight250.com. It was published by Research World for SMR. So you can go and see that article and read the whole piece now. But Natasha, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated it.
My pleasure. And thanks so much for, giving me this platform. I feel so strongly about what we do for a living. And I think it's an amazing place to be. And we're really a beacon of light and information and a guide in these times of change. And I think, this is a really critical time for our profession. So I'm so pleased that you guys are, really heroing what we do for a living through this program.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. We love to champion the huge talent out in our profession that, as you say, is just not heard from enough. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Crispin.
And now, still on the subject of entertainment, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Tracy Stewart, Head of Analysis and Insights at MTAB. Welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thank you for having me, Crispin.
It's brilliant to have you here. Now, look, based on the examples provided by Natasha, are you seeing more research being conducted by clients to understand the changing landscape in media and entertainment?
Yes, absolutely. Natasha's points certainly resonate. The media sector, in relation to both content and how people access it, is evolving. So insights are vital to help contributors pitch to their audiences. As you can see from this anonymised tracking data, engagement in traditional media is significantly lower for the younger generation than for our Gen X generation, but it's also been in decline over the last few years. However, we can dive further into the data and see that interaction for non-traditional media is not dissimilar across generations. And for some program genres, it allows us to identify opportunities to expand.
Thanks, Tracy. This is fascinating stuff. Now, look, once you've identified these opportunities, how do you help media companies refine that into program content?
That's a good point to make. So here we can see maybe if they've given a pitch to make a show that makes people feel good, we can look at the data, but genres that resonate with one generation have a different priority for another. Identifying a particular category, for example, comedy in this instance, we can see key statements here that show what brings together certain age groups and where we have differences. Diving into the data by more refined demographics, such as gender or specific show presentation, lets insights professionals access the breadth of appeal within the audience. This is a brief example of how we help users in the media and entertainment sector. Being continuously curious enables executives such as Natasha to investigate common traits to bring users together, or key differences to adjust the reach of their audiences.
Tracy, this is absolute gold dust. It really is fantastic stuff. Now, if people want to find out more information, how can they get in touch with you?
Sure, they can send an email to info@mtab.com and we'll be happy to help them.
Oh, fantastic. Right, well, look, that wraps up another episode of the Insight250 Spotlight series. A huge thank you to both of my experts today. We really appreciate you joining us. Stay tuned for more episodes and more discoveries. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, keep innovating. Thank you.